Hey, I'm Pastor Rod. Thanks for joining us today. I hope this message makes a difference for you. Well, when you get pulled over for speeding, you always seem to have an excuse ready.
I wasn't speeding, officer. Just got my hair cut. I just look fast.
I'm sorry, officer. I'm just getting over a bad cold, and every time I cough, my foot just slams the gas.
See, what happened was there was a fly in my car. So I rolled down all the windows and went as fast as I could to see if it could suck down. I'm really sorry.
My car has a recall for unexplainable acceleration. I'm actually going to get it fixed right now.
Some people are experts at excuses. They've got an excuse for every decision, for every mistake. So what's your excuse? I mean, not for speeding. What's your excuse for not fully obeying God, for not fully following? What's your excuse for not giving to God, not serving in ministry, not sharing your faith? Why aren't you making a huge difference? We have a lot of excuses, a lot of reasons why we don't obey God. Well, I'm not good enough. I've made too many mistakes in the past. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I don't have enough money. I've been hurt. People have let me down. I haven't been a Christian long. I'm still new to this. I'm too old. I'm too young. I just can't do it. They're all excuses. In the story we look at today, God used an unlikely hero, and instead of making excuses, one man willing to obey delivered an entire nation. The story starts with sad words. Once again, the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. The Israelites were locked in a pattern. They would disobey God, violate his commands, and turn to idol worship. And every time God responded by removing his hand of blessing and protection. And right here, before we even get to the cool part of the story, there's a lesson for us. We talk about the positive side of it often, a simple logical principle: obedience leads to blessing. When you obey God and his commands, you'll be blessed. If you obey God's commands regarding finances, God will bless you. I share testimonies from people who have discovered his blessings in response to their obedience because I want you to be encouraged. If you obey God's principles and commands regarding your relationships, God will give you healthy, blessed relationships. When you honor and obey God, he responds by giving you the desire of your heart. If you obey God in your business, God will bless your business. If you obey God in how you respond to and resolve conflict, God will bless you with peace. If you obey God in sharing your faith, God will bless you. You'll see people accept Jesus. Blessing leads to obedience. Even people who don't think I should talk about money or sex accept that principle. We love that side of it. Well, we love that side of it when we obey. God is a God of love and blessing. God wants to bless his children. However, when, like the Israelites, you choose to disobey, you risk the judgment, the correction, the discipline of God. Once again, the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. So, in response to that, the Lord gave King Eglon of Moab control over Israel. Together with the Ammonites and Amalekites, Eglon attacked Israel and took possession of Jericho. And the Israelites were subject to Eglon of Moab for 18 years. It wasn't the first time the foolish Israelites chose to disobey God. They knew right, but did wrong. In this case, God allowed King Eglon to conquer Israel because of their disobedience. This is the other side of the principle. God never blesses disobedience. In fact, God judges disobedience. When you choose to disobey, God will remove his hand of blessing and protection from your life. And I wonder how long it took the Israelites to make the connection that the reason they were captive was because of their disobedience. See, it's easy to be enemy-focused. When people experience consequences of their disobedience, they blame others. They blame Satan. Why does this keep happening to me? Why is everyone against me? Why me again? I want to be sensitive. At the same time, I have a responsibility to you to be truthful and direct. It may be the reason it keeps happening is because, like the Israelites, you keep disobeying. God loves you enough to allow you to suffer the consequences of disobedience. And you say, well, wait a second, that doesn't sound like love to me. Well, think about it from the perspective of a parent. If you rescue your child from every negative consequence, what happens? They never learn obedience to you or to God. As long as you shield them from the consequences, they will continue in their behavior and never make the connection. Well, I have a word for you today. Make the connection. Understand the reason you continue to struggle is because you continue to disobey. Disobedience will never lead to God's blessing. Make the decision to obey God. In your finances, in your relationships, in your habits, in your sexuality, in your words, obey God. The Israelites finally made the connection. And Israel cried out to the Lord for help. And God said, what's that sound? I don't hear anything. Really? You want me to rescue you when you disobeyed me? Sorry. I'm done with you. This is like the 10th time around. Nope, you're on your own. Let me know how it turns out. Well, thank God that's not how he responded to the Israelites, and that's not how he responds to us. When Israel cried out to the Lord for help, the Lord raised up a man to rescue him. His name was Ehud, son of Gera, of the tribe of Benjamin, who was left-handed. In this case, a more accurate translation would be that Ehud was disabled in his right hand. He only had use of his left hand. In those days, Ehud would be seen as broken and flawed. He was an unknown, unlikely deliverer. He's not the typical hero. The Israelites sent Ehud to deliver their tax money to King Eglon of Moab. Nations that were defeated in battle had to pay a tribute or tax to the foreign leader. King Eglon probably wasn't directly ruling over Israel, but he still made them pay a big amount of money every year, and that amount of money didn't just affect the nation, it affected every individual. Taxes went up. So they sent Ehud as a messenger boy. So Ehud made himself a double-edged dagger that was 18 inches long, and he strapped it to his right thigh, hidden under his clothing. Now, this is pretty important because a right-handed man, which is what everyone was and what everyone would expect, including the king's security, a right-handed man would have the dagger strapped to his left thigh, right? So he can reach, pull it out. But because Ehud was left-handed, which was not common, he couldn't use his right hand, the dagger was strapped to the opposite leg. No one thought to look there. It was completely overlooked by the king's security detail. He brought the tax money to Eglon, who was very fat. How would you like to be known as the fat guy of the Bible? I mean, he's obviously extremely overweight for this detail to make it in the story. And the detail is probably mentioned not to be mean, but because Eglon had grown rich and fat off Israel's money. His physical stature symbolized his greed. He was very fat while the Israelites were starving. And now here's where the story gets good. After delivering the payment, Ehud sent home those who'd carried the tax money. Apparently it's a lot of money. There's a lot of guys carrying it. But when Ehud reached the stone carvings near Gilgal, partway home, he turned back and he came to Eglon and he said, I have a secret message for you. It's a secret. No one else can know it. It's a secret, king. So the king bought the story. He commanded his servants to be silent and he sent them out of the room. The king was so unimpressed with Ehud that he wasn't worried about being alone with the enemy. Obviously, neither the king nor the security guys saw Ehud as a potential deliverer. He's just a guy with a flaw. Ehud is not who you would expect to be the hero of the story. He wasn't a warrior, he was disabled. But as you'll see in a moment, his disability also meant he was uniquely prepared by God. If the Jews had been asked to vote on a leader, Ehud wouldn't be first choice, second choice, third choice or 3,000th choice, but he was God's choice. And God uses unlikely people. As you read through the Bible, you discover that's actually God's preferred way of doing business. God chose a shepherd boy, David, to kill a giant no one else was willing to fight. God chose Peter, a fisherman who didn't measure up and was hot-tempered, to lead the church. God chose a Christian killer, Paul, to disciple the church and to write much of the New Testament. God chose an exiled, murdering stutterer, Moses, to speak for God and to lead the people out of Egypt. God sent his son, Jesus, the Messiah, as a humble carpenter, not a powerful political figure or a king. I could go on and on. God uses unlikely people for huge kingdom assignments. The very thing that seems like a weakness to you might be exactly what qualifies you to be used by God. Other people may not recognize how God can and God will use you. Pastor Dave and Cheryl are in their 70s. Please don't tell Cheryl I told that. I'm not going to say that tomorrow. That's not in the notes. And they don't speak Spanish. That would seem like not speaking Spanish would be a fairly big obstacle to be the leaders of our Latino ministry. But God uses them in spite of their weakness. And now, 10 years ago, Dave came to me one day and said, you know what? I really sense that the Lord is calling us to work with our Latinos. And under their ministry, our Latino church is healthy and strong and reaching out in our community like never before. We've started an immigration ministry reaching out to people who need help with the systems of our government. They don't even speak Spanish. How in the world can God use them? Maybe you know Sarah Scrow, but you may not know her story. When Sarah was 3.5, a benign brain tumor that sat between her optic nerve and her pituitary gland was discovered. It had completely smashed the optic nerve. Sarah has no vision in her left eye and very limited field of view in her right eye. What people with 20/20 vision can see at 500 feet away, Sarah can't see until it's 5 feet away. Sarah's parents brought her up to be independent and productive. She was told at school one day by someone that she couldn't do something because she couldn't see. Sarah came home and asked her mom if that was true. And her wise mom said, I don't know, Sarah. You'll just have to try and see if you can. After that, Sarah was never afraid to try new things. She graduated second in her high school class. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science and a minor in mathematics from Missouri Western State University. Between her last 2 years of college, Sarah interned at NASA. At NASA. There was a period in Sarah's life where she felt broken and confused and angry and discouraged. A lady asked if she wanted to go with her to the Assembly of God church down the street. And Sarah said, the church is so warm and welcoming and friendly. The message was interesting and exciting. We just started going. My brother and I both dedicated our lives to Jesus and were filled with the Holy Spirit. 2 years later, Sarah completed not one but 2 master's degrees, one in information technology management, the other in information systems security. July 2006, Sarah started a program at Lions World Services for the Blind in Little Rock, and it was then that she started attending First NLR. 11 months later, she held a certificate as a Microsoft Certified System Administrator and was in love with this church. She had an internship through the program with Northrop Grumman, and they offered her a job. She accepted the job because she wanted to live here so she could come to church here. Sarah, who can see at 5 feet what you see at 500, has served our church in greeters ministry, special events, real life ministry, and serves weekly in her connections class. Her main ministry focus now is at Celebrate Recovery, Metro, and Cool Teens. She also serves as a small group leader and training coach at Celebrate Recovery. She recently started helping with the Helena West Helena Celebrate Recovery launch team. So tell me again, what's your excuse? See, you may not even be aware of your potential, but God has plans to use you in amazing ways. Paul said it this way, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you. Doesn't seem very complimentary when you're writing a letter. Not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose those nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies? That makes it quite clear none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything we have, right thinking, right living, a clean slate, and a fresh start comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. That's why we have the saying, if you're going to blow a horn, blow a trumpet for God. Isn't that a great passage? When God uses unlikely people, instead of man getting the credit, God gains the glory. You've met many of our missionaries who are making a difference among unreached people groups. They aren't the people you expect that God would recruit. They aren't professional preachers or flashy, charismatic leaders. They are ordinary, average people who are being used by God to carry His word for the first time to people who've never heard. And I want to challenge you. Listen to me. Be open to the fact that God can use you far beyond what you've ever imagined. To which you say, well, no way. How in the world could God use me? It's not about you. It's about the God inside of you. And God chooses unlikely people for significant kingdom assignments. I am praying that God will speak to average, ordinary, no way it can be me people who will commit to His assignment and His call. I'm praying God calls young people and old people and families and staff members to the front lines of the battle, that God calls you to make a difference. Does that scare you? I wonder if Ehud was scared. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us his emotion. What we do know is that this flawed, ordinary, most unlikely guy was about to be used by God to deliver a nation. And I love the way it happened. Ehud walked over to Eglon. He was just sitting alone in a cool upstairs room and said, I have a message for you from God. As King Eglon rose from his seat, Ehud gave him the message. He reached with his left hand, pulled out the dagger strapped to his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. The dagger went so deep that the handle disappeared beneath the king's fat. So Ehud left the dagger in, and the king's bowels emptied. Then Ehud closed and locked the doors and climbed down the latrine and escaped through the sewage access. It's really in the Bible. He killed the enemy and escaped by climbing down the toilet. Isn't that a great story? After Ehud was gone, the king's servants returned and found the door to the upstairs room locked. They thought he might be using the latrine, so they waited. When the king didn't come out after a long delay, they became concerned and got a key. When they opened the door, they found their master dead on the floor. While the servants were waiting, Ehud escaped. Ladies and gentlemen, this story is actually in the Bible. It's right out of the movies. Well, the king's guys waited and wondered. Ehud got away by sneaking out through the toilet, and the most unlikely guy became the hero, but it wasn't over yet. Look what happened next. When he arrived in the hill country of Ephraim, Ehud sounded a call to arms. Then he led a band of Israelites down from the hills. These are the same guys who've been afraid for years, 18 years. Follow me, he said, for the Lord has given you victory over Moab, your enemy. The guy you would never pick as a hero or a deliverer led an army to fight an enemy they hadn't been willing to fight for 18 years. There's a powerful principle. When God uses unlikely people, it inspires others to believe for victory. When God uses the unlikely, the credit goes to God, not the person. No one said, we can't fight. We're not as strong or qualified as you, Ehud. Instead, they all looked at Ehud and said, if God can use him, God can use me. Nothing's impossible for God. When God uses unlikely you to make a huge kingdom difference, it's going to inspire others to follow and to obey. Your radical obedience will challenge others to radically obey as well. See, your victory is not just about your victory. It's about God calling his people to do what they never thought they could do. And now look at the second half of verse 28. Because this is just 4 little words, but to me, this is the incredible part of the story. So they followed him. Ehud, the unlikely hero, the flawed, disabled guy. Remember, this is a time where they viewed someone with a disability as being worthless, useless, cursed by God. That's the guy led Israel into battle against a nation that held him captive for 18 years. And the Israelites took control of the shallows of the Jordan River across from Moab, preventing anyone from crossing. They attacked the Moabites, killed about 10,000 of their strongest and bravest warriors. Not one of them escaped. Now, if you heard God's plan ahead of time, there's no way he'd give it a chance. If God had said, I've heard your cries, here's how I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to get a disabled guy, and he's going to come in, and he's going to tell the king he has a secret. And he's going to kill the king. Then he's going to escape through the toilet while the guards think the king's going to the bathroom. And then that same guy, the disabled guy, he's going to come back and say, come on, it's time. Follow me, and we're going to defeat the enemy. You'll follow him and completely wipe out the Moabites. See, that's a crazy plan, isn't it? That's nuts. It seems foolish. It seems impossible that it would work, but it did. So Moab was conquered by Israel that day, and the land was at peace for 80 years. 80 years of peace and freedom because one unlikely guy was used by God. Ehud was the God-appointed and God-anointed deliverer for the entire nation. When unlikely people obey God, all things are possible. So here's my question. How does God want to use you? What plan that doesn't seem to make sense, that you could never dream up, does he have in place when you're fully ready to obey him? See, one of my chief prayer points is, God, I want to immediately obey you. When it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense. Help me to obey without question. When you say give, I'll give. When you say go, I'll go. When you say stay, I'll stay. When you say speak, I want to speak. I want to fully and immediately obey you, God. No delay, no excuses. I say, Lord, today my answer is yes. Whatever you ask, yes. In fact, I wrote a book about it. The title is Immediate Obedience. And I want to challenge you to read it and take the challenge to say yes instantly to the Lord. So one day only, well, today and tomorrow, 24 hours only. This book is available for $5 at the activity counter. Not making anything off of it, taking a loss. But I want you to read it and take the challenge. We've also got Spanish copies. I learned how to write in Spanish, and so there's those. For just $5. Stop at the activity counter. If you can't afford it, stop by and say, Pastor Rod told me it was his gift to me. Take it. Here's what I wonder. If Ehud had been unwilling, what would have happened? Would Israel have been captive another 80 years? I don't think so. I really don't. If Ehud had been unwilling to obey God, if he'd instead made a bunch of excuses why he couldn't do it, God would have raised up another deliverer. Israel still would have been free, but Ehud would have missed his chance. He would have sat on the sidelines knowing he could have been part of God's deliverance. If you don't obey God, God's kingdom will still advance. God's plan will continue forward. You'll just miss your chance. If you don't give a dime, this church will still move forward. you'll just miss out on God's blessings. If you say all they want is my money, fine, keep your money. We'll do just fine without you. But you'll miss the blessings. If you won't go where God directs, God will send someone else. Someone else will be a part of the great adventure. If you don't say yes to God in ministry, someone else will. You'll miss the difference you could make and the joy of being used by God. What a shame it would be to live and die and miss out on God's great plan for your life. We got a group of people on Thursday nights who go work at Metro Worship Center, our inner city campus, and they feed people and they minister to the homeless and they mentor at-risk kids and students. If God's put on your heart to do that and you don't, we'll find somebody else. We will. But you will miss out on the joy of seeing a life transformed and changed because you got involved. You might be unlikely, but God has a plan to use you in remarkable ways. So here's my question. What's your excuse? Do you feel like there's something in your past, a fault or a failure that disqualifies you? Do you feel like you're not good enough? Feel like there's just no way, too old, too slow, you don't have what it takes? Good, because that's a sign that God's ready to use you and he'll gain glory. And I want to pray for you. Would you bow your heads with me? Some of you have made excuses long enough. It's time to give up the excuse. It's time to give up the excuse why you won't obey God with your finances. It's time to give up the excuse why you're not involved in ministry. Some of you, it's time to give up your story. You got a story. You were hurt, and you have let that story of being hurt keep you from being used for way too long. Time to give up the story because God has a plan for you, and God wants to use you. Yeah, the kingdom's going to go forward without you, but you'll miss the joy of being used by him in incredible ways.